Hi all, this is Professor Nassif. I hope you are well, you're staying safe, and I hope you also have picked up Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck. This is going to be just a brief, well, somewhat brief lecture, just some important influences that should be mentioned. What is it that inspired Steinbeck to write Travels with Charlie, which actually received high acclaim um, in 1960, right? So there are recurring themes of social and economic justice in this and among most of his novels. Something to keep in mind. Certainly, we'll find that to be the case as we read on. Um, and his formative years were spent with his parents, Olive and John Ernst. John Ernst Steinbeck, his father. And his father was actually somewhat reclusive, didn't spend a lot of time with the family so much as his mother was very much had a heavy influence in his life, as did his sisters. So the women in his life actually were quite significant. His mother was a teacher and also was very much involved in social justice. He grew up in Salinas, California, uh, almost at the age of the 20th century. He grew up. And he had three sisters, Elizabeth, and Mary, who was the youngest, and Esther. Right, so Esther and Elizabeth were the oldest, and Mary was the youngest, and he adored Mary. His sisters took a great deal of care of him, and Mary was actually an inspiration for The Red Pony, which is a book that he wrote well before he wrote Travels with Charlie. He did grow up with some entitlement, some privilege, but really he escaped from his family when he was about 16 years old. He differed from them, and he went to work with migrant workers in the northern part of California, somewhere near San Joaquin Valley. And here we have a quotation that you can read. I will also send this so that you can read through these, if it takes you some time. But here we see that he differed from his parents, and he did spend a great deal of time with migrant workers, which influenced, was a heavy, certainly great deal of influence on his writing, certainly when it comes to The Grapes of Wrath. If we're familiar with any of his work, I think probably the most popular book that we might know of is Of Mice and Men, which was actually originally supposed to be a children's tale. But his dog, this is a lesser known fact, but his dog actually ate his first draft of Mice and Men, so it ended up being a rewrite that turned into a more of an adult audience sort of book. I'm hoping that some of us are familiar with some of his work. Perhaps we read it as sort of a staple in high school. So he went to Stanford, which was unusual. It wasn't, as typical for people to go to college at this time, but he did go to Stanford, and he was in and out. He didn't really love his academic life, so he was really more engaged in writing. So in and out of Stanford, also spent some time. Jumped on a ship in the southern part of California and went to through the Panama Canal to Panama City and then to Havana, Cuba, where a lot of his contemporaries and he, spent a debaucherous life, had a great deal of fun, spent money, and sort of explored it as a repository for, drinking and partying. So that's the truth. And he made it all the way to New York City on jumping these ships, and he ended up working at Madison Square Garden. He was actually constructing the previous Madison Square Garden, moving concrete blocks when someone had fallen 6 floors in front of him, and so he quit his job. I'm going to continue this on another video.